Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of the Baltic Bonanza Dev Diary, covering the alt history paths for Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia. But before we start discussing all the interesting alt history paths coming in the next DLC, there's just one point I want to cover first. This Friday and Saturday is going to be Paradoxcon. For those who don't know, Paradoxcon is an event where Paradox shows off all the games, updates and DLCs they have coming for the next year. This is important for us because HOI4 will of course be having its own section, and in it they're going to discuss some probably big updates. The things you probably can expect are going to be the name of the DLC, coming with 1.11 Barbarossa, but more importantly, if I was to bet a good chunk of money, a Soviet focus tree will be revealed. If it isn't, well, I've lost a lot of money. So, mark it down in your calendar, see if you can find out when it's going to be, or feel free to subscribe to the channel because I'll be going over all of it right here. But enough about that, let's talk about the Baltics. So the Dev Diary begins by talking about Estonia, and as we know for all the Baltic treaties, they have a shared industry and communist path, but their other paths are unique to each of them. So Estonia begins with this. You begin with two mutually exclusive focuses, the era of silence and rally the nation. The era of silence being the more historical path, where you intend to suspend all elections out of fear of the fascist menace. The so-called VAPS movement is intending to overthrow the Estonian government, and it's your job to ensure that a civil war doesn't take over the country if you're playing a historical Estonia game. The core build of Estonia will be dealing with this insurrection and then just preparing your nation for the inevitable World War II that you know is to come. We can see in this image that some of the ways you're intended to fight them includes using command power, which seems to be an interesting use which hasn't really been focused on in previous versions of DLCs, as well as using political power and civilian factories. All pretty normal, although I will mention that the numbers there don't actually have the political icon next to them. I don't know if that's a bug, I assume it is, and they're not just a random 50 and 25 for no reason. But hey, maybe it's just 50 in general, just a 50. As the historical focus tree continues down, you'll open up some economy and internal stability focuses, including the National Council of Estonia, which gives some small buffs to a production efficiency cap and factory output. If the player wants to follow through with some alt history, there is the option here to go democratic, but it does require you to remove support for basically every faction that isn't democracy. But on the flip side, you can continue with the dictatorship, although you will have to have some democratic roots living among the shadows. But enough about the historical path, because now we have the ahistorical path, where the VAPS movement that we were talking about earlier rises up and takes control of the government. This will be done in a very similar way to how the British fascist marches worked, with you taking control of certain states in Estonia using decisions. Once you've taken control of the country, you can open up Estonia to more of a warmonger's path, as well as some modest focuses, including the Vapsid youth, which gives a little bit of recruitable population. What's far more interesting though is the coup you did in Estonia to take control of it. You can also replicate in Finland, doing the exact same Civil War-esque mechanic that you did here, there. I will briefly mention about this particular image. You can actually see that the title of the nation is Vapsid Estonia. Once Estonia and Finland have both joined with their fellow fascist ideals, you can decide whether you want to lean more into a Nordic identity and conquer some Nordic countries, or if you want to go down the Finno-Ugric identity and push east into Russia. Each of these paths has their own end goal formable nation. The one, if you go into the Scandinavian area, is the Nordic Empire, with the Nordic identity being yours. And if you headed east into the Soviets, you can create the Empire of the Finno-Ugri. And that sums up Estonia for the first of our three countries. All in all, that is quite an interesting set of focuses, especially to do with the Finno-Ugri nation you get towards the end. I mean, these borders are certainly something to behold. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do from here once you've achieved whatever this is, but I mean, it's certainly something to look at. We don't really see too many of the actual descriptions of focuses themselves, so it's really hard for me to comment on what the path getting there is going to be like. We sort of just see the title and the story of the focus trees, but not too many actual descriptions. So I guess I'm going to have to leave it up to you to decide what you think of it from just what we've been told so far. Oh, and the flag has like a little reindeer, so that's kind of cool too. Or is it a deer or a stag? So the next focus tree heading south is that of Latvia, and with that comes the historical decision to suspend the constitution of Latvia. In great contrast to the previous Estonian focus tree, this one actually has a very key split early on between your military and your civilian governments. So with the 4 key options we begin with, we start with the historical path, where Ulmanis assigns a marshal to be his prime minister, as opposed to the pre-existing Farmers' Party candidate. As we can see here, this is definitely the military-based focus set, as well as a mutually exclusive focus at the bottom deciding between keeping presidential titles and having an all-out military dictatorship. Establishing your martial prime minister Jānis Paļģis as your military dictator is perhaps a little bit ahistorical, but it's these minor ahistorical paths that keep the game interesting for me. Also, what is the flag up here? It's like somebody's took the English flag and stuck a Brazilian fiesta on top of it. And on the alternate side of slight ahistorical nature, you can choose to keep the pre-existing Prime Minister of Kievis, and renew him for a second term. As part of the farmers group, he's more so about the civilian economy as opposed to the military one. And again, the same as with the martial Prime Minister, there is a mutually exclusive focus choice at the end, the one where you can choose whether you want to maintain the dictatorship as it currently is, or move towards a more democratic society by renewing the constitution of Latvia. We don't really know what any of these focuses do again, because we weren't really shown, but I can assume they do stuff like giving civilian factories or giving bonuses to it, stuff like that. Okay, so we've seen Latvia's minor alt history paths, let's go to something a little bit more hard alt history. Now we move to the Thundercross Movement and its noted Thundercross Empire. You begin by having to choose between suppressing or empowering the Thundercross Movement. If you choose to suppress them, you can start empowering paramilitaries and organisations that are a little bit more in line with the government. Aligning with these more patriotic paramilitaries gives you some better bonuses, as well as the decision Women in the Workforce, which to my memory gives you 3% recruitable population, so not too bad. So on the right side we have the option to work with the Thundercross Movement, and it begins by deciding whether you want to enact a balancing movement to enable the Perkencrusts into your government. That is to say that working with these sort of ultranationalists doesn't necessarily mean they will take control of your government. If you're able to keep them in check for long enough and not enable a civil war, you can get some good late game bonuses from them. We see here you get the stability, the war support, this conscription law cost, and all of that fascism you accumulated has gone to the wind. If you however choose that you want them to overthrow the government, then there's of course that option as well. The Thunder Roars alone focus allows them to take over the government, and interestingly, the German Reich is more likely to allow Latvia to join their faction, so I'm guessing you're on bad terms with them at the start. On top of that, the next focus is down works towards annexing the Baltics entirely, demanding Lithuania and Estonia's subjugation and annexation. These Thundercross guys have no chill. And so the next part falls into the realms of alt history that I can't particularly comment on, because we appear to have entered an era that I'm not quite sure about, but I'll let you decide that one for yourselves. The leader, known as Gustavs, views Christianity to be a weak and foreign religion, and so, following with the Wrath of the Old Gods focus, you can create a neo-paganism state. Now, the plausibility of this I will leave for you to decide, but the focus it gives you with the name Dev Turiba, said wrong probably, does give you some really good buffs. I mean, look at that Justify War goal time reduction. Now, following the mutually exclusive, you had the option to either work with Germany or go it alone. If you chose to go with Germany, you have the ability to open up to Ostland. The good thing about this is it allows you to occupy Belarus and have a good strong grip with the Germans for a push into the Russians. We also see there's a united Baltic Empire paving way to avenge the ancestors, although we didn't actually see what that entails. I assume it's just a larger version of a united Baltic region. So yeah, that covers everything to do with the Latvians. 2 down, 1 to go. I think it's good. I certainly like the design of it a lot. The neo-paganism stuff is a little bit peculiar to me, but I can get past that, because I think Ostland is a decently historical enough idea that I think is in the realms of possibility for me to swallow. But then again, Greece can form Byzantium in the previous DLC, so I guess historical nature died a long time ago. And so we come to Lithuania, which is by far the biggest of the national focus trees of the Baltics. So it's spread out into 3 sections, but most everything has some layer of interconnected nature to it. We start off in the centre, where we're going to be covering the Prime Minister, again similar to Latvia. Your choices are a martial Prime Minister, a very familiar decision, and a priest turned Prime Minister, which gives me the reminiscence of the Mexico focus tree with the 2 Catholic ways you can go. Regardless of which you pick, the end goal is the same, with Smetona, the current president, achieving the ability to have full control of his party politics, meaning you gain no stability hit for the amount of party popularity you have. On the right side of the focus tree, we have some of the more external politics, including integrating the opposition, which is sort of making sure you and Poland are on good terms. I'm not sure how useful that is when they're going to be eaten in 1939, but yeah, it's your choice if you pick it. Or you can decide to work with the Soviets, which has the added benefit that during Molotov-Ribbentrop you will get Vilnius, once that has been completed. There is also the option to take a more anti-Soviet path, enabling you to go to war with the Soviets. Gets the event The True Enemy. It's a bit mysterious what that's about, but certainly an anti-Stalinist approach if I've ever seen one. And finally we come to the left side of the Lithuanian focus tree, which covers the core root of the politics of the country. Your initial decision is deciding what to do with a former Prime Minister known as Augustinas Voldemaras. This Iron Wolf leader has been in a Lithuanian prison for quite a while now, so you start off by choosing whether you want to free him or exile him. Freeing him will push you in a more fascist direction, enabling you to go on a war path and restore the old borders of Greater Lithuania. It's actually quite interesting how many different versions of war there is just in this little section. The Greater Lithuania, Restoration, the Order, invading Poland, demanding Vilnius, claiming Livonia. There's lots going on here to do with claims. I'm actually pretty happy with how it looks. And assuming your dreams of a Lithuania are met, you can create the Greater Lithuania, with a Lithuanian Poland if you so choose. Yes, that is what it looks like, and yes, I don't know. I mean, might we just say that Lithuania is looking fantastic, don't get me wrong, I mean, goodness me. But Lithuanian Poland is it's a sad day for the Poles. I'm wondering if all of this is cord as well, because if all of this is cord, that is going to be a pretty strong Lithuania when the time comes. And of course we'd be remiss if there wasn't a monarchist option. King Mindargus III. We can see here that the focus is pretty straightforward. It immediately turns you into the Kingdom of Lithuania, as well as giving you some stability and war support. Here we can see the wonderful hat that he adorns, which was teased last week, which, yes, just extraordinary headwear there. 22 manpower, by the way. And following down, you can eventually get to the minigame of creating the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, where you have to individually try and core and claim certain areas and grow it into one united Commonwealth. It's noted that if both Poland goes monarchist and Lithuania goes monarchists, and both of the countries are trying to form Poland-Lithuania, they can either choose to unite or go to war to see which one's going to win, which, let's be honest, is going to be Poland. The Dev Diary concludes by talking about how there are some shared focuses among all of the branches, specifically in regards to democracy, where if you choose to you go down a democratic path, you can try and unite the Baltic region under some shared ideals, such as a pan-Baltic bank and an economic union. The end result is you can propose a Baltic union and try and go for full unification or semi-unification. Also, all 3 countries will have access to a government in exile branch, giving the usual bonuses to manpower gain, military factories, civilian factories for trading, all that good stuff. And finally, you can also choose whether you want to give basing rights to the Russians or the Germans, which has the ability of, sure, making them more aligned with you, but sacrificing your autonomy along the way, which may eventually lead into the occupation path. And that sums up the final Lithuanian tree. Again, I feel like there's many focuses, it doesn't quite address what they do, so I don't really know what the end result of some of these tree paths are going to be. I mean, if we try and zoom in here, we can see that there is the merge the military and civilian governments path, which allows you to formalise a Baltic Entente and then look north, which makes me wonder, can you get a sort of Scandinavian faction going on with some Nordic countries and of course the Scandinavian region, but also the Baltics? There's also the option here to go beyond the Baltics and directly join the Allies, which wasn't talked about. So yeah, there's a few things going on in this tree that are a bit of a mystery to me. I don't really know what's going on, but I suppose none of us do until we finally see the tree. And that's it. That's all we're going to talk about this week. Yeah, sort of a long, descriptive, narrative-based dev diary, talking about the general gist of where you're going with these individual nations. I feel like, yeah, not too much on the details though, so it's hard for me to really give an overview of what I think about the trees, so much as the end goal result of what you're trying to get, such as that Finno, Ergo, Sapmi nation that we saw, which was kind of funny for Estonia. So that's everything we're going to be covering this week. I hope you've enjoyed. A lot more narrative, story-based dev diary this week. I feel like there weren't too many details about individual focuses, which kind of makes it hard for me to comment on much, apart from those endgame formable nation things, which were something to behold, of course. And as a reminder, of course, in the coming days we have Paradoxcon, so feel free to go watch that, but if you don't, you can subscribe here and I'll be covering it here too. With that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed and I'll see you all again later. Neo-paganism in HOI4.